Nebraska Territory, 1867. The prairie wind whispered secrets across the tall grass as Willow Fletcher clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 22, she had already seen enough of cowboys to know they brought nothing but heartache and violence. The bruises on her sister's face back in St. Louis had taught her that. The crude remarks from trail-worn men as she traveled west had confirmed it, and the stories from other women, whispered warnings about men who lived by their fists and guns, had sealed her conviction. Men who break horses break women too, her mother had warned before Willow boarded the stagecoach bound for her uncle's homestead. Those words echoed in her mind as she stared at the endless horizon stretching before her. The frontier demanded survival above all else, and Willow had convinced herself that meant complete independence from any man, especially those who wore spurs and spent their days in the saddle. Love was a luxury the frontier didn't afford women like her. Better to be alone than to find herself another casualty of a cowboy's temper. Willow smoothed down her pale blue cotton dress, now dusty from travel, and adjusted her bonnet over her honey blonde hair. She was heading to her uncle's homestead near Clearwater Creek to help with his growing mercantile business. Safety in commerce, she told herself. Safety in numbers. Safety in staying far away from the rough men who drove cattle and carried six-shooters. The stagecoach hit a deep rut, jolting her from her thoughts and sending her small valise tumbling to the floor. The old woman beside her offered a sympathetic smile. "First time out west, dear?" the woman asked. "Yes," Willow replied, retrieving her belongings. "My uncle has a store in Clearwater Creek. I'll be keeping his books. Clearwater's growing fast. Lots of ranches springing up. Means lots of cowboys coming through," the woman said with a knowing look. "Pretty girl like you will catch eyes." Willow's jaw tightened. "I'm not interested in catching anyone's eye, ma'am. I'm here to work." The stagecoach rounded a bend, and the driver shouted something unintelligible. The vehicle slowed, then lurched to a stop. "What's happening?" Willow asked, peering out the small window. "Looks like trouble," the woman beside her whispered. The door swung open, and the driver's weathered face appeared. "Trees down across the road, folks. Gonna be a delay." That's when Willow heard it, the thundering of hooves approaching fast from behind. Her heart leaped into her throat as the stagecoach rocked with the driver's hasty dismount. Her worst fears seemed to materialize as two riders appeared alongside the coach. "Hey there," a deep voice called. "Need a hand with that tree?" "Cowboys." Willow's fingers curled into fists on her lap. "Sure wouldn't mind the help," the driver replied. "Big pine, probably came down in last night's storm." Willow heard boots hit the ground and the jingle of spurs. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands, determined not to acknowledge their presence. But when a shadow fell across the coach door, she couldn't help looking up. There stood a young man, no more than 26, with eyes the color of a summer sky and wheat-blonde hair just visible beneath his hat. Unlike the trail-worn cowboy she'd encountered before, his face was clean-shaven and his clothes, while clearly work-worn, were neat. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat to the elderly woman before his eyes settled on Willow. Something in his gaze made her breath catch, not the usual predatory assessment she'd come to expect, but something quieter, more curious. "Ladies, we'll have you back on the road shortly. My name's Thomas Atwood. My ranch hand, and I spotted your trouble from the ridge." Despite herself, Willow met his gaze. "How long will it take?" A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "With 4 men working?" "Not long at all, miss." "Fletcher. Willow Fletcher." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Miss Fletcher." He nodded, stepping back. "Well, Miss Fletcher, I hope we haven't delayed your journey too much." As he turned to help with the tree, Willow watched him walk away, the familiar wariness in her chest now mixed with an unfamiliar curiosity she immediately tried to suppress. True to his word, within 30 minutes, the road was clear. As the stagecoach prepared to depart, Thomas Atwood appeared at the door once more. "Heading to Clearwater Creek?" he asked. Willow nodded cautiously. "That's my town too." "Fletcher," he mused. "Any relation to Emmett Fletcher at the Mercantile?" "My uncle," Willow admitted. Something like pleasure crossed his face. "Well then, I suspect we'll be seeing each other again, Miss Fletcher. I supply your uncle with beef for his new butcher counter." Before Willow could formulate a response that would discourage such a meeting, he tipped his hat again and stepped back, closing the coach door with surprising gentleness. As the stagecoach lurched forward, the elderly woman beside her chuckled. If that's what cowboys look like in Clearwater Creek, perhaps you should reconsider your position on Catching Eyes, dear. Willow turned to stare out the window, watching Thomas Atwood mount his horse with fluid grace. One polite encounter doesn't change a man's nature, she said firmly. But even as the words left her mouth, she couldn't help wondering if perhaps there were exceptions to every rule. Clearwater Creek appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent. The town was larger than Willow had expected, a proper main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple visible at the far end, and the bustle of early evening activity. The stagecoach pulled up before a two-story building with Fletcher's Mercantile painted in bold letters across the storefront. Willow gathered her belongings, heart beating faster at the prospect of her new life. Her uncle, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice, swept her into a bear hug the moment she stepped down. "Willow, look how you've grown. Last time I saw you, you were knee-high to a grasshopper." "Hello, Uncle Emmett," she said, returning his embrace. "Thank you for having me." "Nonsense. Family helps family, and I need help with those ledgers something fierce." He grabbed her valise and ushered her toward the store. "Your room's upstairs, behind the store. Simple, but comfortable. Martha's got supper waiting." Willow followed, taking in her new surroundings with cautious optimism. The Mercantile was well-stocked, orderly, and busy even at this late hour. Her uncle's wife, Martha, greeted her with a warm smile and immediately began fussing over how thin she looked. That night, after a hearty supper and a tour of the store, Willow sat by the window of her small room, looking out at the unfamiliar stars. The frontier stretched before her, full of opportunity and danger in equal measure. She would make a life here, a safe, independent life free from the complications of cowboys and their rough ways. But as she drifted towards sleep, it was Thomas Atwood's clear blue eyes that followed her into her dreams. The following weeks established a rhythm to Willow's new life. Each morning, she helped open the store, then settled at the small desk in the back to manage the accounts. The afternoons were spent organizing inventory and helping customers. To her surprise, she discovered she had a talent for commerce, suggesting additional purchases, arranging displays to catch the eye, and keeping the books with meticulous precision. Uncle Emmett was delighted. "Business is up 15% since you arrived," he announced one evening. "You've got a mind for trade, just like your father." The comparison to her father, a failed businessman whose gambling debts had ultimately claimed his life, made Willow uncomfortable, but she accepted the compliment with grace. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the bell above the door chimed, and Thomas Atwood stepped into the Mercantile. Willow, who had been arranging a display of calico, froze mid-motion. He looked different in the store's light, taller somehow, broader across the shoulders. His clothes were clean, his hat in his hands, revealing that wheat-blonde hair, now neatly combed. He nodded to several patrons before his eyes found Willow. "Miss Fletcher," he said, approaching with that same measured step she'd noticed by the stagecoach. "Good to see you settling in." Willow straightened, smoothing her skirts automatically. "Mr. Atwood, what brings you to the Mercantile today?" "Monthly supplies," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "And I'm due to speak with your uncle about increasing his beef order." "He's in the back office," Willow said, gesturing toward the rear of the store. "I can show you." As she led him through the store, she was acutely aware of his presence behind her, not looming or threatening, but solid and warm. The other customers, mostly women, watched with undisguised interest. Uncle Emmett greeted Thomas with enthusiasm, and the two men quickly fell into discussion about cattle prices and delivery schedules. Willow, intending to leave them to their business, was surprised when her uncle called her back. "Willow, I'd like you to handle the paperwork for our new arrangement with Mr. Atwood. He's increasing our order by 30%, which means adjusting the books accordingly." Trapped, Willow nodded and took the chair beside her uncle's desk. Thomas settled into the chair opposite, and for the next half hour, they discussed terms and figures. To Willow's surprise, the young rancher was astute about business, quickly grasping the implications of each proposal and making reasonable counteroffers. When the business concluded, Thomas rose to leave, but paused at the door. "Miss Fletcher, I wonder if you might join me for supper at the hotel dining room this Saturday, to celebrate our new business arrangement." The invitation caught her completely off guard. Mr. Atwood. Call me Thomas, please. Willow hesitated, every instinct telling her to decline. Cowboys were dangerous. Cowboys broke hearts and bodies with equal disregard. And yet, there was something in his steady gaze that made her wonder if perhaps there were exceptions. Willow would be delighted. Uncle Emmett answered for her, ignoring her startled glance. 7 o'clock? Thomas nodded, his eyes still on Willow's face. 7 it is. Until Saturday, Miss Fletcher. After he left, Willow rounded on her uncle. Why did you answer for me? I haven't decided if I want to have supper with him. Uncle Emmett chuckled. Thomas Atwood is the finest young rancher in the county, Willow. Honest, hardworking, and building quite a successful spread south of town. Any girl would be lucky to catch his eye. I'm not interested in catching anyone's eye, Willow insisted. Especially not a cowboy's. Her uncle's expression softened. Is this about what happened to your sister? Willow, not all men are like that scoundrel she married. Willow turned away, unwilling to discuss her sister's bruises or her own fears. I came here to work, Uncle Emmett, not to find a husband. And work you shall, but all work and no living makes for a dull existence. He patted her shoulder gently. Go to supper. If you don't enjoy his company, you never have to see him socially again. I promise. Saturday arrived too quickly. Willow spent the afternoon in a state of nervous indecision, trying on and rejecting every dress she owned before finally settling on a sage green gown with modest lace trim. Martha helped arrange her honey blonde hair into a simple but elegant style, secured with her mother's pearl combs. You look beautiful, Martha assured her, and nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. It's just supper, dear. With a cowboy, Willow reminded her, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. Martha's expression grew serious. Thomas Atwood isn't just any cowboy, Willow. He came here 4 years ago with nothing but determination and saved enough working other men's cattle to buy his own small spread. Now he's got one of the most promising ranches in the territory, and not once have I heard of him raising his voice, let alone his hand, to anyone. Willow wanted to believe her. The Thomas she had met certainly seemed different from the cowboys who had frightened her sister or made crude remarks as she traveled west. But years of caution weren't easily set aside. Thomas arrived promptly at 7, dressed in clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest that accentuated his broad shoulders. He had clearly taken pains with his appearance, and the effort wasn't lost on Willow. Miss Fletcher, he said, his eyes warming as they took her in. You look lovely. Thank you, she replied, accepting his offered arm with only slight hesitation. The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Clearwater Creek, not grand by Eastern standards, but clean and well-appointed, with white linens and proper silverware. Thomas pulled out her chair with practiced ease, and Willow found herself wondering where a cowboy learned such manners. As if reading her thoughts, he smiled across the table. My mother would have my hide if I forgot my table manners. She was determined her sons would be gentlemen, regardless of where we lived. Your mother sounds formidable, Willow observed, relaxing slightly. She was, Thomas replied, a shadow crossing his features. Cholera took her and my father 3 years ago, back in Missouri. That's when I decided to head west and make my own way. The simple statement revealed more than he perhaps intended: loss, determination, a willingness to forge ahead despite tragedy. Willow found herself warming to him almost against her will. Their conversation flowed more easily than she had expected. Thomas asked thoughtful questions about her life in St. Louis, her journey west, and her impressions of Clearwater Creek. He listened attentively to her answers, seeming genuinely interested in her thoughts. When their meal arrived, roast beef with vegetables and fresh bread, Thomas waited for her to begin before taking up his own fork. May I ask you something, Miss Fletcher? He said after a comfortable silence had fallen. You may ask, she replied cautiously. Why do you tense every time I come near you? I've noticed it from the first moment by the stagecoach. It's as though you expect me to. I'm not sure what. The directness of his question caught her off guard. Willow set down her fork, considering her response carefully. I grew up hearing stories about the frontier, she began slowly. About the type of men who live here. Men who, she paused, searching for words. Men who break horses and hearts with equal disregard. Thomas supplied quietly. Willow's eyes snapped to his face. Yes. He nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than offended. There are men like that out here. Men who've been hardened by the land, or who came west already carrying violence in their hearts. But there are good men too, Miss Fletcher. Men who value gentleness precisely because they know how harsh life can be. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Willow she had thought safely locked away. For the first time, she allowed herself to really look at Thomas Atwood, not as a cowboy to be feared, but as a man trying to build something meaningful in this wild country. I would like to show you, he continued, that not all of us conform to the stories you've heard, if you'll allow me the chance. It was an invitation and a promise wrapped in one. Willow found herself nodding before she had fully processed her decision. I would like that, Mr. Atwood. Thomas, he corrected gently. If we're to be friends, I'd prefer you use my given name. Thomas, she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. And you should call me Willow. His smile was like sunrise breaking across the prairie. Willow, he said, as if testing the sound of it. It suits you, graceful, resilient, rooted yet flexible. The compliment brought warmth to her cheeks, and for the remainder of the evening, Willow found herself laughing more freely than she had in years. As Thomas walked her back to the mercantile beneath a canopy of stars, she realized with a mixture of wonder and trepidation that her carefully constructed defenses were beginning to crumble. He stopped at the door to the side entrance that led up to her room. Thank you for a lovely evening, Willow. Thank you for inviting me, she replied, suddenly shy. Thomas hesitated, then reached for her hand, lifting it slowly to his lips. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Willow didn't think to pull away until his lips had brushed her knuckles in the lightest of kisses. Good night, he said, releasing her hand and stepping back, his eyes never leaving hers. Good night, Thomas, she whispered, then slipped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing seeking escape. In the privacy of her room, Willow pressed her fingers to the spot where his lips had touched, wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, she had been wrong about cowboys after all. The following weeks brought a gradual but unmistakable shift in Willow's life in Clearwater Creek. Thomas began stopping by the mercantile regularly, sometimes with legitimate business, sometimes merely to exchange a few words with her as she worked. Each visit chipped away at her carefully constructed walls. One afternoon, he appeared with an invitation that left her both excited and terrified. I'd like to show you my ranch, he said, leaning against the counter as she tallied a customer's purchases. Sunday, if you're free. Your aunt and uncle would be welcome too. Willow hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that, though I don't ride. Thomas smiled. I have a buggy, and the gentlest mare in the territory to pull it. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Thomas arrived with the promised buggy, drawn by a beautiful chestnut mare with kind eyes. Uncle Emmett and Martha declined to join them, citing church obligations, though the gleam in Martha's eye suggested matchmaking rather than devotion was behind their decision. The ride out to Thomas's ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. As they traveled, he pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his early days in the territory. When I first arrived, I slept under the stars and worked 14 hours a day on other men's spreads, he told her. Saved every penny until I could put a down payment on 50 acres. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And now? Willow asked, genuinely curious about his progress. Now I have 600 acres, 100 head of cattle, a decent house, and plans for more, he said with quiet pride. It's a good start. The ranch came into view as they crested a gentle rise, a neat collection of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The main house was modest but well-built, with a wide porch and glass windows that caught the sunlight. You built this yourself? Willow asked, impressed despite herself. With help, Thomas admitted. Neighbors pitched in. That's how it works out here. We look after each other. As he helped her down from the buggy, his hands at her waist were strong but carefully respectful. Willow was beginning to understand that this was Thomas's way, strength tempered by consideration, power held in check by gentleness. He showed her around the property with obvious pride. The barn with its orderly stalls, the corrals where young calves frolicked, the vegetable garden struggling but persistent against the prairie winds. It's not fancy, he said as they approached the house, but it's home. The interior revealed more about Thomas than weeks of conversation had. Books lined shelves in the main room, history, agriculture, even poetry. A piano stood in one corner, its surface dust-free and recently polished. You play? Willow asked, surprised. Poorly, Thomas admitted with a laugh. My mother insisted we all learn. My brother got the talent. I got the determination. But I like the sound of it in the house. Makes it feel less empty. The kitchen was simple but well-equipped, and Thomas moved around it with unexpected confidence, preparing a meal of cold chicken, bread, and fresh vegetables from his garden. As they ate at the sturdy table, Willow found herself imagining what life might be like in such a place. Hard work certainly, but rewarding too, with beauty all around and the satisfaction of building something lasting. After the meal, Thomas took her to meet his horses. The large barn smelled of hay and leather, comforting scents that reminded Willow of childhood visits to her grandfather's farm. This is Samson, Thomas said, leading her to a stall where a massive black gelding nickered softly. My working horse. And this, he continued, moving to the next stall, is Liberty. She's gentler, better for someone learning to ride. Willow approached the mare cautiously. I've never been comfortable around horses. They're so large. They can sense fear, Thomas said, but they can also sense kindness. Here, he took an apple from his pocket and placed it in her palm. Hold your hand flat. Nervously, Willow extended her hand toward Liberty. The mare's soft muzzle tickled her palm as the horse delicately took the offered treat. See, Thomas said softly, standing close enough that Willow could feel the warmth radiating from him. Gentle, despite her size and strength. The words seemed to hold a deeper meaning. Willow turned slightly to find Thomas watching her, his blue eyes intent but kind. Would you like to learn to ride? He asked. I could teach you. The prospect was both frightening and exhilarating, like so many things in this new life she was building. I think I would, she said, surprising herself with her own courage. Thomas's smile was worth the moment of fear. We'll start next Sunday then. With Liberty. She'll take good care of you. As they walked back to the buggy for the return journey, Thomas stopped suddenly. Willow, I want you to know something. I understand your caution around men like me. The West breeds hard men, it's true. But I believe a man proves his worth not through dominance, but through how gently he treats those in his care, be they animals, land, or— He paused, his eyes meeting hers. Or people he cares about. The simple declaration, spoken in the fading light of a prairie evening, touched Willow more deeply than any flowery profession could have. Here was a man who understood power and chose restraint, who possessed strength but valued gentleness. Thank you for today, she said softly. For showing me your home. Thank you for coming, he replied. It's a better place with you in it. The ride back to town passed in comfortable silence, both of them lost in thoughts of what might be possible in this vast, demanding, beautiful country. As summer progressed into fall, Willow's life in Clearwater Creek expanded beyond the walls of the mercantile. Under Thomas's patient instruction, she learned to ride Liberty, gradually overcoming her fear of horses. Each Sunday, weather permitting, they would ride across his land, Thomas pointing out improvements he planned to make, seeking her opinion in a way that made her feel valued. Her work at the mercantile flourished as well. Uncle Emmett, recognizing her talent for business, gave her increasing responsibility. She began ordering inventory, negotiating with suppliers, and even suggested expanding their offerings to include more items for women and children. You've got a head for commerce, her uncle often said, beaming with pride. This store has never run so smoothly. But it was her growing friendship with Thomas that brought the most unexpected joy to her days. He courted her with a patient steadiness that respected her initial fears while gently challenging them. There were picnics by the creek, suppers at the hotel, and quiet evenings on her uncle's porch, talking about books and dreams and the future. Thomas never pushed for more than she was ready to give. His hands, calloused from ranch work but unfailingly gentle when they touched hers, seemed to speak a language of their own, one that promised safety rather than danger. Clearwater Creek noticed their courtship with approving interest. Never seen Thomas Atwood so smitten. Willow overheard Mrs. Patterson tell Martha one afternoon in the store. He's always been respected, but reserved-like. Now he's smiling all the time. The observation made Willow's heart flutter. Was she the cause of that change in him? And what changes was he creating in her? One crisp October afternoon, Thomas arrived at the mercantile with an unusual request. The harvest dance is Saturday next, he said, his hat in his hands. Would you do me the honor of attending with me? Willow hesitated only briefly. Public dances meant public acknowledgement of their courtship. It was a step she hadn't been sure she was ready to take. But looking at Thomas's hopeful expression, she found her fears mattered less than they once had. I would be delighted, she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. His face lit with pleasure. I'll call for you at 6. It's at the community hall. As he turned to leave, the bell above the door chimed again, announcing new customers. 3 cowboys Willow didn't recognize sauntered in, trailed dust still clinging to their clothes, and the smell of whiskey preceding them. Their appearance immediately set Willow on edge. These were the type of men she had feared, with hard eyes and harder expressions. Thomas tensed visibly, positioning himself between Willow and the newcomers. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice polite but cool. "Can I help you find something?" The tallest of the 3, a man with a jagged scar running down one cheek, smirked. "Atwood, didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be out playing rancher." "Clay Wilson," Thomas acknowledged, his stance casual but alert. "Passing through town. Might be staying a spell," Wilson replied, his eyes sliding past Thomas to settle on Willow with an appraising look that made her skin crawl. Heard Clearwater Creek had some pretty attractions worth seeing. Thomas's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "The mercantile closes in 30 minutes, gentlemen. If you're looking to make purchases, I suggest you do so promptly." Wilson's smirk widened. "Always so proper, Atwood. Some things never change." He tipped his hat mockingly in Willow's direction. "Ma'am, we'll be seeing you around town, I expect." After they had made token purchases and left, Willow released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Who were they? Thomas's expression was troubled. Clay Wilson and his crew. They drift from town to town, looking for easy money and easier trouble. "Wilson and I have history. We worked the same ranch when I first came west. He didn't take kindly to my refusal to join him in some questionable activities. Should we be concerned?" Willow asked, unnerved by the encounter. Thomas shook his head. "They'll likely move on soon enough. Wilson's all talk unless he's got whiskey in him." He reached for her hand, his touch reassuring. "Don't worry. I won't let any harm come to you." The promise should have frightened her. Once, she would have rejected such protection as possessive. But now she recognized it for what it was. Not a claim of ownership, but a pledge of care. The harvest dance transformed the community hall into a wonderland of autumn colors. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the assembled townspeople, and a small band played lively tunes that set feet tapping and skirts swirling. Willow wore her best dress, a rich burgundy that complemented her honey blonde hair, which Martha had arranged with small yellow flowers. When Thomas first saw her, the naked admiration in his eyes made her blush to the roots of her hair. "You are beautiful, Willow Fletcher," he said simply, offering his arm. The evening passed in a whirl of music, laughter, and conversation. Thomas proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her through waltzes and reels with confident steps. During one pause between songs, he brought her a cup of punch and led her to a quiet corner. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his eyes never leaving her face. "Very much," she replied truthfully. "I never expected to find such joy here." Thomas's expression softened. "Nor did I, until you arrived." Willow, whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. Clay Wilson and his companions had arrived, clearly intoxicated and looking for entertainment. The music faltered as they pushed their way into the hall. "Don't stop on our account," Wilson called, his words slurring slightly. "We're just here for some dancing with the pretty ladies." Thomas's body tensed, his eyes tracking Wilson's movements through the crowd. "I should speak with the sheriff," he murmured to Willow. "Stay here." Before he could move, however, Wilson spotted them and changed course, weaving through the dancers with surprising agility for a drunk man. "Atwood," he called, "and the lovely shop girl. Saving a dance for me, sweetheart?" Willow shrank back instinctively, her old fears resurging at the leering expression on Wilson's face. Thomas stepped forward, his voice low but carrying. "You're drunk, Wilson. Go sleep it off." Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Always thinking you're better than everyone, ain't you? The gentleman cowboy. Well, I know different." He turned to Willow. "Did he tell you about our time at the Triple R?" "About what he did too." Thomas's hand shot out, gripping Wilson's arm. "That's enough." Wilson jerked away, nearly losing his balance. Don't touch me, Atwood. Unless you want to settle things properly this time. The tension in the room was palpable now, conversations dying away as people sensed the brewing confrontation. Sheriff Davis appeared at the edge of the crowd, hand resting meaningfully on his holster. "There a problem here, gentlemen?" he asked, his weathered face impassive. Wilson glared at Thomas for a long moment before forcing a laugh. "No problem, Sheriff. Just reminiscing with an old friend." He backed away, hands raised. "Enjoy your dance, Atwood, while it lasts." The threat hung in the air even after Wilson and his companions had been escorted out. Thomas turned to Willow, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry about that." "What was he talking about?" Willow asked. "About the Triple R Ranch." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a long story. Not one for tonight." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Would you like to continue our dance?" The music had resumed, but the magic of the evening had been tarnished. As they moved across the floor, Willow could feel the tension in Thomas's body and see the concern in his eyes as they swept the room periodically, as though expecting Wilson to return. Later, as they walked back to the mercantile, Thomas was unusually quiet. At the door, he hesitated before speaking. "Willow, there are things about my past, about the man I was before coming to Clearwater Creek, that I haven't told you. Things I'm not proud of." The confession stirred her old fears, but Willow forced herself to listen, to trust the man she had come to know rather than the stereotype she had feared. "We all have pasts, Thomas," she said quietly. "I'd like to hear yours, when you're ready to share it." He nodded, relief evident in his features. "Soon, I promise." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle as ever. "Thank you for tonight. Despite the interruption, it was one of the finest evenings of my life." As his lips brushed her knuckles in what had become a familiar farewell, Willow found herself wondering what secrets Thomas Atwood carried, and whether they would change how she felt about the man who was slowly but surely claiming her heart. The following week brought an unexpected flurry of activity to Clearwater Creek. A cattle buyer from Chicago arrived, looking to secure herds for the growing meat-packing industry back east. For ranchers like Thomas, it represented an opportunity for significant profit. "He's offering top dollar," Thomas explained during a quick visit to the mercantile. "But it means I need to gather my scattered cattle quickly. I'll be riding out today with my men, probably gone 3 or 4 days." Willow felt a disproportionate sense of disappointment. "I understand. Business comes first." Thomas's eyes softened. "Not always. But this sale would mean I could finally build the new barn I've been planning. Maybe add on to the house as well." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "Make improvements for the future." The implication wasn't lost on Willow. Her cheeks warmed as she realized he was building not just for himself, but potentially for a shared life, one that might include her. "Be careful," she said, conscious of Uncle Emmett pretending not to eavesdrop from behind the nearby shelves. "The weather's turning." Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that had become dear to her. "I've weathered worse storms. I'll be back before you know it." True to his word, a storm rolled in that very night, a fierce autumn gale that rattled windows and sent townspeople scurrying for shelter. Willow lay awake, listening to the wind howl around the building's corners, thinking of Thomas and his men out on the open range with only their slickers and perhaps a tent for protection. The storm persisted for 2 days, finally breaking on the third morning to reveal a town somewhat battered but largely intact. As Willow helped clean up debris that had blown against the storefront, a rider appeared at the far end of the street, moving at a gallop despite the mud. Her heart leaped, expecting Thomas, but it was one of his ranch hands, a young man named Eli that she recognized from previous visits to the Atwood Ranch. "Miss Fletcher," he called, dismounting with a splash. "Is the doctor in town?" Alarm shot through her. "Dr. Pearson?" "I believe so. What's happened? Is Thomas hurt?" Eli's face was grim. "Got himself shot. We were bringing in cattle when Wilson and his boys tried to cut out part of our herd. Boss confronted them, and Wilson pulled a gun. Got him in the shoulder. We patched him up best we could, but he needs proper doctoring." The world seemed to tilt beneath Willow's feet. "Shot? Is he? Will he?" "He's tough, Miss Fletcher," Eli assured her. "Conscious and giving orders still. Just need the doc to dig out the bullet and stitch him proper." Relief warred with renewed fear. "I'll fetch Dr. Pearson. Where is Thomas now?" "At the ranch. The other boys are with him." Eli hesitated. He was asking for you, miss. Said to tell you he's sorry about missing your riding lesson. The simple message, so typical of Thomas's consideration even when wounded, nearly undid her composure. I'll come with the doctor, she decided, already turning toward Dr. Pearson's office. Uncle Emmett, who had overheard the exchange, stepped forward. Take our buggy, Willow. It'll be faster than riding double with the doctor. I'll explain to Martha. An hour later, Willow was urging the buggy through muddy roads toward Thomas's ranch, Dr. Pearson beside her with his medical bag clutched firmly in his lap. The journey seemed interminable, each jolt of the wheels a delay she could ill afford. They arrived to find the ranch in a state of controlled chaos. Two of Thomas's men were keeping watch from the barn, rifles at the ready. Inside the house, Thomas lay on his bed, pale but conscious, his left shoulder wrapped in bandages already stained with blood. "Willow," he said, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it. "You shouldn't have come. The roads are terrible." She rushed to his side, taking his right hand in both of hers. "As if I would stay away." Dr. Pearson immediately took charge, unwrapping the makeshift bandages to examine the wound. "Clean through the muscle, missed the bone. You're lucky, Atwood. This could have been much worse." The doctor sent Willow to heat water while he prepared his instruments. When she returned, he was administering whiskey as both disinfectant and anesthetic. "You might want to wait outside, Miss Fletcher," Dr. Pearson suggested as he selected a pair of forceps. "This won't be pleasant." Willow squared her shoulders. "I'm staying." Thomas's eyes, glazed with pain but still alert, found hers. "Willow, you don't need to see this." "I'm stronger than I look," she replied, moving to take his right hand again. "And you'll need something to squeeze when it hurts." A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Always surprising me." What followed tested Willow's resolve, but she remained steadfast as Dr. Pearson extracted bullet fragments, cleaned the wound thoroughly, and stitched the ragged edges together. Thomas bore the ordeal with gritted teeth, his hand gripping hers so tightly that she knew she would find bruises later, a small price to pay for sharing some portion of his pain. When it was done, Thomas lay exhausted, the whiskey and pain having finally pulled him into restless unconsciousness. Dr. Pearson applied a clean bandage and packed up his instruments. "He'll need watching tonight," the doctor told Willow. "Fever's the danger now. If infection sets in." He didn't need to complete the thought. "I'll stay," Willow said immediately. Dr. Pearson raised an eyebrow. "That wouldn't be entirely proper, Miss Fletcher." "Propriety be damned," she replied, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. "He has no family here. Someone who cares for him should be at his side." The doctor studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll tell your uncle I advised it medically. Change the bandage in the morning. If fever develops or the wound shows redness beyond the immediate area, send for me immediately." After the doctor left, Willow settled into a chair beside Thomas's bed, preparing for a long vigil. Outside, she could hear his men discussing guard rotations, still wary of Wilson's return. As night deepened, Thomas stirred, his eyes opening to find her still beside him. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice rough with pain. "Where else would I be?" she replied, brushing damp hair from his forehead. He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "Willow, I need to tell you about Wilson. About what happened at the Triple R. It can wait until you're stronger," she said. Thomas shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "No, you should know. In case." He didn't finish the thought, but the implication sent a chill through her. "I'm listening," she said, settling closer. Thomas's eyes fixed on some distant point as he began. "When I first came west, I worked wherever I could find jobs. Ended up at the Triple R under a foreman named Garrett. Hard man, cruel to the horses and the hands alike. Wilson was his right hand." He paused, gathering strength before continuing. "There was a young woman at the ranch, daughter of the cook. Mary. Wilson took a fancy to her, wouldn't leave her be. One night, I found him trying to force himself on her in the barn." Willow's hand tightened around his as Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger with the telling. "I pulled him off her. We fought. I was younger then, quicker to anger. Beat him badly, broke his nose, cracked some ribs. Would have done worse if the other hands hadn't pulled me off." He met her eyes directly. "I'm not proud of the violence, Willow, but I'd do it again to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves." "What happened after?" she asked softly. "Garrett fired me," But the ranch owner heard what happened. He fired Garrett and Wilson both when Mary told him everything. Last I heard, Wilson had drifted south, working as a hired gun for cattle barons during the range wars. Thomas's expression darkened. He's a dangerous man, Willow, and he blames me for ruining his reputation. The story settled between them, filling in pieces of Thomas that Willow had sensed but not understood. His controlled strength, his protective nature, his insistence on gentleness despite the capacity for violence. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "It doesn't change how I see you, Thomas. If anything, it confirms what I already knew, that you're a good man. One of the best I've ever known." Relief washed over his features. "I was afraid, when I saw you pull back at the dance, that you might believe whatever he was going to say." Willow leaned forward, acting on impulse rather than calculation, and pressed her lips gently to his forehead. "I know who you are, Thomas Atwood. I see you more clearly every day." His eyes, bright with emotion despite the pain, held hers. "And I see you, Willow Fletcher. Brave, beautiful, and far stronger than you realize." The intimacy of the moment wrapped around them like a blanket, shutting out the dangers that lurked beyond the ranch house walls. Whatever came next, Wilson's revenge, the challenges of frontier life, the uncertainties of the future, they would face it together. As Thomas drifted back to sleep, his hand still holding hers, Willow made a silent vow. She would no longer live in fear of what might happen, but in hope of what could be built between two people determined to find gentleness in a harsh land. Thomas's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. The feared infection never materialized, thanks in part to Willow's diligent care during those first critical days. She returned to town only after being certain he was out of danger, and even then, she rode out to the ranch every other day to check on him. Uncle Emmett, rather than objecting to these unchaperoned visits, seemed to approve. "That young man stood between you and harm," he told Willow. "Shows his character. And you showing loyalty in return shows yours." Meanwhile, Sheriff Davis and a hastily formed posse had searched for Wilson and his men, but the outlaws had vanished into the vast territory surrounding Clearwater Creek. The consensus among the townsfolk was that they had fled after the shooting, knowing that attempted cattle theft and shooting a respected rancher would bring serious consequences. Despite this reassurance, Thomas insisted on having one of his men escort Willow whenever she traveled between town and the ranch. "Wilson holds grudges," he explained, his face grim despite the improvement in his health. "I won't risk your safety." By mid-November, Thomas's wound had healed enough for him to resume light duties around the ranch. His left arm remained weaker than before, but Dr. Pearson assured him that with time and exercise, he would regain most of his former strength. The first snow of the season dusted Clearwater Creek one crisp morning, transforming the town into a winter wonderland. Willow stood at the mercantile window, watching the flakes swirl in the morning light, when Thomas appeared on horseback. Her heart lifted at the sight of him, strong and upright in the saddle, his breath visible in the cold air. He had regained his color, and though he still favored his left side, his movements were becoming more fluid each time she saw him. "Good morning," he said, stomping snow from his boots as he entered the store. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Willow smiled, noting how his eyes warmed as they rested on her face. "It is. What brings you to town? I thought you were fixing fence lines today." "Change of plans," Thomas replied, glancing around to ensure they had a moment of privacy in the otherwise empty store. "I came to ask you something." The seriousness in his tone made Willow's pulse quicken. "What is it?" Thomas reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I've been thinking a lot during my recovery, about life, about what matters most." He extended the package toward her. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Willow unwrapped the paper to reveal a small box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the winter light streaming through the window. "Willow Fletcher," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but out here, life teaches us not to waste time when we find something precious." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I've loved you since I first saw you on that stagecoach, looking so determined and so afraid all at once. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The proposal, though not entirely unexpected given the direction of their courtship, still left Willow momentarily speechless. 6 months ago, she had arrived in Clearwater Creek convinced that cowboys were to be feared, that independence was her only protection against heartbreak. Now here she stood, facing a future she had never imagined possible, one filled with love and partnership rather than isolation and fear. "Thomas," she began, her voice catching. "I." The bell above the door jingled, cutting off her response as Mrs. Patterson bustled in, trailing snow and cheerful greetings. Thomas quickly closed the ring box and slipped it into Willow's hand with a rueful smile. "I'll call for your answer this evening," he whispered. After closing, Willow nodded, tucking the box into her pocket, her mind whirling with emotions she could scarcely name. The day passed in a blur of customers and routine tasks, though Willow performed them all with mechanical precision, her thoughts elsewhere. The weight of the ring box in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, demanding a decision she had never expected to face when she boarded that stagecoach months ago. As closing time approached, Uncle Emmett noticed her distraction. "Something on your mind, Willow? You've been counting the same inventory 3 times over." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and showed him the box. "Thomas asked me to marry him this morning." Her uncle's eyebrows rose, but his expression was pleased rather than surprised. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," Mrs. Patterson interrupted, "and he said he'd return this evening for my answer." Willow bit her lip. "Uncle Emmett, I don't know what to say." His weathered face softened. "Don't you? Seems to me your heart decided some time ago, even if your head's been slower to follow. But marriage, to a rancher, a cowboy, it's everything I feared when I came west." Uncle Emmett chuckled. "Is it? Or is Thomas Atwood everything that disproves those fears?" He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Willow, I've watched you these past months. You're happier, stronger, more alive than I've ever seen you. That man looks at you like you're the sunrise after the longest night. And you look at him the same way, whether you admit it to yourself or not." His words struck a chord deep within her. It was true. Thomas had shown her a different way of being, a different kind of strength than she had imagined possible. With him, she felt safe not because she was independent, but because they were interdependent, each supporting the other, each valuing the other's strengths. "But what about the store?" she asked, grasping at practical concerns. "You needed help with the books, with expanding the business. And you've given it, magnificently," Uncle Emmett replied. "But I didn't bring you here to tie you to a counter for the rest of your days. I brought you here to give you a fresh start." He smiled kindly. "Besides, Clearwater Creek isn't so large that a rancher's wife can't still keep the mercantile's books if she's of a mind to." As the last customer departed and Uncle Emmett turned the sign to closed, Willow made her decision. Drawing the ring from its box, she slipped it onto her finger, admiring how it caught the lamplight. "It suits you," came Thomas's voice from the doorway. Willow turned to find him standing there, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders and hope in his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "My answer is yes, Thomas." Joy broke across his face like dawn. In 3 strides, he crossed to her, gathering her into an embrace that was both powerful and exquisitely gentle. As his arms encircled her, Willow felt the last of her fears dissolve, replaced by a certainty as clear as the diamond on her finger. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I never thought I could love a cowboy, but you've shown me that strength can exist without cruelty, that power can be used to protect rather than harm." Thomas drew back slightly to look into her eyes, his own bright with emotion. "And you've shown me that a life built solely on hard work and determination was only half a life. You've brought color and warmth to my world, Willow." With her uncle discreetly retreating to the back room, Thomas lowered his lips to hers in their first true kiss, tender, reverent, and filled with promise. His hands, those strong, calloused hands that had once frightened her, now cradled her face with such care that tears sprang to her eyes. "When?" he asked as they finally parted, his forehead resting against hers. "Spring," Willow replied, thinking of renewal and new beginnings. "When the wildflowers return to the prairie." Thomas smiled. "Spring it is, though it will be the longest winter of my life, waiting to make you my wife." As they stood together in the quiet mercantile, snow falling gently outside the windows, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought her here, From a frightened young woman convinced that cowboys represented everything dangerous about the frontier, to a woman who had found love in the most unexpected place, the gentle hands of a man strong enough to be kind. Winter in Nebraska Territory proved as harsh as promised, with bitter winds and deep snow isolating Clearwater Creek for weeks at a time. Yet for Willow and Thomas, it was a season of joyful planning and deepening connection. When weather permitted, Thomas rode into town, sometimes staying for supper with Willow and her aunt and uncle, sometimes escorting her to church socials or community gatherings where they were congratulated by neighbors who had watched their courtship unfold. During the worst blizzards, when travel was impossible, they exchanged letters carried by the mail rider who braved the elements weekly. Thomas's letters revealed a poetic side she had only glimpsed before, descriptions of the snow-covered ranch, plans for spring planting, and always, his longing to make her his wife. Willow worked on her trousseau in the evenings, sewing linens and garments for her new life. Martha taught her recipes and household management skills, while Uncle Emmett insisted on providing furniture and household goods as part of her dowry. A girl should start married life properly equipped, he declared when she protested the generosity. As the weeks passed, Willow found herself studying maps of Thomas's ranch, making notes about possible garden expansions, sketching ideas for the house addition he planned to build. What had once seemed an alien landscape now felt increasingly like home, a place where she could put down roots and flourish. February brought a thaw, temporary but welcome after months of bitter cold. Thomas arrived in town with a wagon rather than on horseback, his face alight with excitement. "I have something to show you," he told Willow. "Bundle up and come with me." Curious, she donned her heaviest coat and climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. They traveled the familiar road toward his ranch, but turned off about halfway there, following a less-used track that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. "Where are we going?" Willow asked, her breath visible in the cold air. Thomas smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." The track emerged from the trees into a small clearing overlooking a bend in the creek. There, to Willow's astonishment, stood the frame of a house, the foundation complete, the walls partially raised, the outline of a wraparound porch clearly visible. "Thomas?" she questioned, her heart beginning to race. He helped her down from the wagon, his eyes never leaving her face. "I couldn't wait until spring to start building. This land adjoins my existing property. I bought it last fall. The house will be ready by our wedding day." He gestured to the structure. "What do you think? The bedroom windows will face east, so you can watch the sunrise. And there's space for a proper garden, sheltered from the worst winds." Tears filled Willow's eyes as she walked toward the skeletal building. It wasn't just a house he was constructing, but a future, their future, planned with such care and consideration for her happiness. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning back to him. "Absolutely perfect." Thomas crossed to her, taking her gloved hands in his. "I want to give you a home of your own, not just rooms added onto my bachelor's cabin. A fresh start for both of us." His eyes, so blue against the winter landscape, searched hers. "Are you happy, Willow?" Truly, the question, asked with such sincere concern for her feelings, touched her deeply. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "I can't wait to be your wife." Their tender moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Thomas tensed, instinctively positioning himself between Willow and the potential threat. Around the bend came 3 riders, and Willow's blood froze as she recognized Clay Wilson in the lead, his face twisted in a malevolent grin. "Well, ain't this sweet?" Wilson drawled, reining in his horse. The happy couple inspecting their love nest. Thomas's voice was deadly calm. "You're trespassing, Wilson, and you're still wanted for shooting me and trying to steal my cattle." Wilson shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "Been laying low, biding my time. Figured you'd eventually lead me to something worth taking." His eyes shifted to Willow, and the naked malice in them made her shiver. "Two things now, looks like." Thomas's hand moved toward his gun, but Wilson was faster, drawing and aiming in one fluid motion. "Wouldn't try it, Atwood. My boys here are mighty quick on the trigger, and the lady might get caught in the crossfire." Willow saw Thomas's shoulders tense, then deliberately relax as he moved his hand away from his weapon. "What do you want?" "Justice," Wilson spat. "You cost me everything at the Triple R, reputation, job, future. Been scraping by ever since, while you got yourself a nice spread, respect in town, and now a pretty wife. His gun remained steady, pointed at Thomas's chest. Figure it's time you lost everything too. Terror gripped Willow as she realized Wilson's intention. He had come not just for revenge, but for complete destruction, to take Thomas's life, his ranch, and possibly Willow herself. The sheriff knows where we are, she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her fear. If we don't return to town, he'll send men looking. Wilson laughed, an ugly sound. By then it'll be too late. Atwood, here, will have suffered an unfortunate accident inspecting his new house. Tragic, really. Building collapse, I'm thinking. His eyes narrowed. As for you, Miss Fletcher, you've got a choice. Come with me willingly, or watch him die slow before I take you anyway. Thomas moved then, a subtle shift that placed him more firmly between Willow and Wilson's gun. You won't touch her, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You want me, Wilson? She has nothing to do with what happened at the R. She has everything to do with it now, Wilson replied. She's what you care about most. That makes her mine to take. The standoff stretched taut as wire, the future hanging in the balance. Willow's mind raced, searching for a way out. They were alone, outnumbered, with Thomas unarmed and Wilson holding all the advantages. Then, almost imperceptibly, Thomas's hand moved behind his back, making a small gesture that Willow interpreted instantly. Run when I move. Before she could respond, a shot rang out from the cottonwoods, striking one of Wilson's companions. As the man fell from his saddle with a cry, chaos erupted. Thomas lunged forward, tackling Wilson from his horse as Willow dove for the partial shelter of the house frame. More shots came from the trees. Thomas's men, she realized, who must have been following at a distance, suspicious of riders in the area. Through the confusion of shouts and gunfire, Willow saw Thomas and Wilson grappling on the ground, Wilson's gun lost in the snow. Despite his still healing shoulder, Thomas fought with the strength of a man protecting everything he held dear. His fist connected with Wilson's jaw, sending the outlaw sprawling. Wilson recovered quickly, drawing a knife from his boot and slashing wildly. Thomas dodged, but not quickly enough to avoid a cut across his forearm. Blood bloomed red against the white snow as the two men circled each other. Should have killed you when I had the chance, Wilson snarled, lunging again with the knife. This time Thomas was ready. He caught Wilson's wrist, twisting until the knife fell. In a move too fast for Willow to follow, he swept Wilson's legs from under him and pinned him to the ground, one knee pressed into the outlaw's chest, hands restraining his arms. It's over, Wilson, Thomas said, breathing hard. You've lost. Again. Wilson struggled uselessly, his face contorted with hatred. Kill me then. Finish it. Thomas shook his head. That's not who I am. You'll face the law for what you've done. As if summoned by his words, more riders appeared, Sheriff Davis and several deputies, alerted by Thomas's ranch hands when they spotted Wilson and his men following the wagon. Quite a mess you've got here, Atwood, the sheriff observed dryly as his men took Wilson and his surviving companion into custody. Good thing your boys had the sense to fetch us. Thomas rose slowly, wincing as he examined the cut on his arm. Good timing, Sheriff. Another minute, and things might have gone differently. Willow rushed to his side, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind his wound. You're hurt, she said, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped the makeshift bandage. Thomas covered her hands with his, stilling their movement. It's nothing. Are you all right? He didn't harm you. The concern in his eyes, for her safety above his own pain, broke something open inside Willow. All the fear she had carried since childhood, the belief that men like Thomas were dangerous, the conviction that independence was her only protection. It all collapsed in the face of this ultimate proof. When danger came, his first and only thought had been for her. I'm fine, she assured him, her voice breaking. Because of you. As Sheriff Davis organized the prisoners for transport back to town, Thomas pulled Willow close, his good arm encircling her protectively. I'm sorry you had to face that, he murmured into her hair. I never wanted you to see violence, to be threatened because of me. Willow drew back to look up at him, her hand coming to rest against his cheek. Don't you understand? You've shown me the difference between violence and protection, between cruelty and strength. She glanced at the house frame, still standing despite the chaos that had erupted around it. What you built here, what you're building for us, it will stand, Thomas, no matter what storms come." His eyes, so troubled moments before, cleared as her meaning registered. He bent to kiss her, a kiss that spoke of relief and love and promises kept. "Let's not wait until spring," Willow said when they parted. "Let's be married now, as soon as the minister can arrange it. I don't want to wait any longer to begin our life together." Thomas's face lit with joy. "Are you sure? What about the house, the garden, all our plans?" "The house will be ready when it's ready," she replied. "Home isn't just a building, Thomas. It's wherever we're together." As they rode back to town beside the sheriff's party, Willow looked back once at the house frame standing strong against the winter sky. She had come west expecting to find independence, to build walls against the very type of man who now rode beside her. Instead, she had discovered that true strength lay not in isolation but in connection, in hands gentle enough to love, yet strong enough to protect. 2 weeks later, Willow Fletcher became Willow Atwood in a simple ceremony at the Clearwater Creek Church. The entire town turned out to witness the union of the mercantile's clever bookkeeper and the respected young rancher, whose courtship had captured their collective imagination. Willow wore a gown of ivory satin that Martha had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding dress. Thomas, standing tall and proud at the altar, wore a new suit ordered specially from Omaha, his blue eyes never leaving Willow's face as she walked toward him on Uncle Emmett's arm. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the packed church. As Willow took her place beside Thomas, he leaned down to whisper, "You are so beautiful." The words, simple and heartfelt, brought a blush to her cheeks and joy to her heart. This man, this cowboy she had once feared, had become her greatest blessing, her most steadfast ally, her future. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the meaning behind them ran deeper than tradition. When Thomas promised to love and cherish her, Willow saw in his eyes the same gentleness that had first begun to change her perception of him. When she promised to honor and respect him, she silently added, "For showing me that true strength lies in tenderness, not dominance." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Thomas's kiss was reverent yet passionate, a perfect balance that reflected the man himself. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Atwood, Willow felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a comfortable shawl. The celebration that followed at the community hall lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, laughter, and a few happy tears. Clay Wilson and his surviving accomplice, safely behind bars awaiting transport to the territorial prison, were forgotten in the joy of the moment. As dusk fell, Thomas led Willow out to the waiting wagon that would take them to their temporary home, his original ranch house, where they would live until their new home was completed. "Ready, Mrs. Atwood?" he asked, helping her onto the seat. "More than ready, Mr. Atwood," she replied, her heart full to bursting. They traveled under a canopy of early stars, the winter landscape silvered by moonlight. When they arrived at the ranch, Thomas surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Your shoulder," she protested weakly, though her arms had already encircled his neck. "Fully healed," he assured her with a smile that held equal parts tenderness and desire. "Strong enough to carry my wife wherever she needs to go." The house welcomed them with warmth and light, Thomas's men having prepared it before tactfully disappearing to the bunkhouse for the night. A fire crackled in the hearth, and fresh flowers, hothouse blooms from Omaha, Willow realized, brightened the table. Thomas set her gently on her feet, but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, Willow." The moment held all the promise of their future, the gentle strength of his embrace, the warmth of the home they would build together, the love that had transformed both their lives. "I never thought I could love a cowboy," Willow confessed, looking up into the face that had become more dear to her than any other. "I was so certain men like you were to be feared." Thomas brushed a strand of honey-blonde hair from her face, his touch as gentle as it had been the first time he helped her down from the stagecoach. "And I never thought a city girl with fear in her eyes would become my reason for being. Life has a way of surprising us." As his lips found hers in the quiet of their home, Willow surrendered to the knowledge that had been growing in her heart since that first meeting. True strength wasn't found in dominance or control, but in the capacity to be gentle even when one possessed the power to be otherwise. Thomas Atwood, with his cowboy hat and calloused hands, had taught her that lesson more thoroughly than any book or sermon ever could. In the years that followed, Clearwater Creek would witness the flourishing of the Atwood ranch and family. The house Thomas had begun building became a home filled with laughter, love, and eventually, the patter of children's feet. Willow maintained the Mercantile's books even after the birth of their first child, combining her talent for business with her new role as wife and mother. The frontier remained challenging: droughts and blizzards, economic hardships, and occasional threats from those who resented the growing prosperity of established ranchers. But through it all, Thomas and Willow faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing season. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work complete, they would often sit together on the porch of the home they had built, Thomas's arm around Willow's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. In those moments, surrounded by the beauty of the land they both loved, they would marvel at the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with fear and ended with the discovery that even in the wildest of places, gentleness could exist in the most unexpected hands.